do you ensure that it's not tampered with later in the process? Is there anything in particular you'd want to say about that? The air cargo screening mandate calls for air cargo to receive, quote, a level of security commensurate with the level of security for the screening of passenger-checked baggage. Is that a standard that you can meet? And I'm thinking particularly here of one of your proposals to screen air cargo with advanced checkpoint technology systems that does not specifically look for explosives. And I wonder if that is a degradation of security compared to the checked baggage. So those two questions, if you will.
On the second question, we are working right now on the standards of what constitutes commensurate with checked baggage screening under the law as to exactly what the requirements are for the machinery that can accomplish that. So I would expect in the spring that we'll have that released, and then that will show the glide path for the rest of the year of what we have to buy and what others have to buy to enable that screening to occur off the airport. And the question on how do you secure the supply chain from where the screening occurs to the aircraft is the linchpin of the program. And the guidance that we will put out on that will indicate that they would have to be in, the screening would have to be in certain controlled areas and then on trucks with drivers who are vetted. The seal, the tamper evidence seal technology that would enable you to quickly tell if something had been tampered with after the screening is all part of it. So we are doing, I think as you may have mentioned in the opening, that we are doing right now in San Francisco, Philadelphia, and Chicago pilot programs to work out all of those details.
I'd like to give the rest of you an opportunity to comment on this this subject, not just the questions I have just raised, but also on the broader plan that Mr. Hawley has outlined and the way the 9/11 Act mandate is going to be met. Maybe start with you, Ms. Barrick.
Sure, thank you. Just one comment on the certified screening program that Mr. Hawley's talking about to push the screening down further in the supply chain. I wanted to mention that this program, a similar program, is already in place in the United Kingdom, and in fact, it's working pretty well for them. And I think TSA has coordinated with the UK in learning from their experiences and rolling this out. Some of the work that we have done on air cargo security, where GAO's looked at this, is that there are some practices in foreign countries that could potentially be applied in the United States, and this was one of them. Another point on air cargo that we found is there's been a lot of focus on cargo transported domestically within the United States, but less of a focus on cargo coming into the United States from foreign countries. For example, we had recommended to TSA that they develop a strategy on how they're going to ensure security for cargo coming into the United States, because even though they have measures in place to ensure the security of that cargo, it's not as stringent as for measures in place for domestic cargo. So we think more can be done in that area. And then a third area related to air cargo has been talked about this morning is technology. We think that DHS, S&T, primarily working with TSA, is still in the early stages of this. And there's lots of technology that they're pursuing that's in the pipeline right now. There's not a lot of time frames for when they expect to complete pilot testing and moving the technologies forward. So I think it would be good to see more planning in terms of those technologies and time frames on when they hope S&T primarily can move those through the chain.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett.
Mr. Chairman, the concept of moving much of the screening downstream is very welcomed in the airport community for air cargo purposes. The air cargo at most of the major airports is really not designed to accommodate a very large screening system or screening systems in the air cargo facilities. and would probably face increasing challenges as we would try to accommodate those, very similar to inline baggage screening challenges at the airports as we develop facilities and change the way that freight flows on the airport from the trucks when it arrives to the point that it gets on the airplane. So the concept of having that cargo as it arrives at the airport already screened and gone through those formalities is a very welcomed approach to that issue.
Ms. Sterling?
I agree with everything that's been said. I would just add that until the technology arrives, that as I said in my testimony, TSA must develop clear and concise screening protocols that will allow the use of existing technology to screen the large volumes of cargo. In addition, I think there's an opportunity between TSA and foreign country security programs to eliminate redundancies and requirements to rescreen cargo that's been screened or flown.
What would you say about these large palletized shipments? There's no TSA-approved screening technology currently available for those. In your view, what alternative methods of screening might?
Again, I think American has stated in the testimony that we are an advocate of the best way is through the supply chain upline. Mm-hmm. We know that there's a large amount of volume in cargo, and we know that the shipments are large, and clearly moving it upstream to the supply chain is the way to go.
All right. Let me just briefly revisit the topic Mr. Carter brought up as we were breaking, the Registered Traveler Program. I think, Mr. Hawley, you expressed, for better or for worse, you expressed your view of that program's progress thus far, indicating, as I understood you to say, that you did not think it had lived up to its security billing in terms of making possible an abbreviation of the screening process, and also also saying that as far as TSA is concerned, you're content to leave the development of this program with the private sector and with the airports. Mr. Bennett, it's your testimony that perhaps most directly addressed this. I wondered what you would have to say about the current state of registered travelers as you see it, and what you think TSA's role should be in moving this program forward.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Carter's comments were correct. The Registered Traveler Program as it exists today is really nothing more than getting you hopefully to the head of a line and getting you through security a little earlier, so that if you're experiencing the 45-minute peak time waits that Mr. Farr referenced from a January day out at Dulles, if he had been a participant in the Registered Traveler, ideally he would have been able to avoid that lengthy delay. But from the airport perspective, we think that Registered Traveler, if done correctly, offers a tremendous benefit to improving the security environment and actually taking the opportunity to reduce the size of the haystack. And from an airport perspective, we would welcome being able to work with the Registered Traveler vendors as well as the TSA and establish what additional requirements might be necessary so that we could improve the benefits of the program and make it a more effective tool in improving the security environment for aviation.
Well, the development of these programs seems to be somewhat stalled, so beyond that general expression of a willingness to cooperate, what kind of steps would you hope to see in the near term?
We would be supportive of expanding the background investigations to expand it to have criminal history record checks and to ping commercial financial databases. Many of us as employers today, when we hire employees, we do all of those investigations on employees before we put them on the payroll. It's very easily done, and it can be done, I think, with not too intrusively and protect the privacy of those people that are applying to be participants in the Registered Traveler Program. If we're able to come to a way to stand that type of program and investigations up, and if it meets with TSA's approvals, then hopefully we would be able to have a security lanes dedicated at our airports for the registered travelers.
With what kind of screening procedures, presumably abbreviated screening procedures?
That would be up to TSA to be able to determine what their level of comfort would be for an abbreviated or modified screening protocols. We're not of the opinion that the people should be allowed to not have screening. We think screening is very important, but we do think that if we have an in-depth knowledge of who these individuals are, that there could be a modified screening protocol that would meet TSA's requirements.
Sounds though like you're placing more stock in the background check than you are in improved technology, for example, to permit to permit shoes not to be removed or something of that sort.
The technology would be a very important piece of that puzzle. But right now, I'm not sure that there's a technology available that is ready to roll out into the screening environment that would, for instance, allow the shoes not to be taken off. But I do think that there may be other benefits that could be just procedural benefits within TSA's protocols that would benefit the throughput for registered traveler lanes.
Mr. Hall, anything you'd like to add?
I think Mr. Bennett captured it very well, and the crux of the matter is, once you make the policy decision that this is going to be a private sector-led program, then it is the private sector who comes up with a risk capital and puts up the effort to go figure out all the requirements of a essentially financial services background check. And I suggested that on January 20th, 2006, and we also proposed that there would be dedicated lanes for registered traveler, and the registered traveler community shot that down and said, no, we don't want to add that, the fee that would allow that to happen to be in there. So essentially, we are waiting on those vendors to come forward with something that would allow us to change the security. And it is a private sector market. And if there is not the market to do that, then it'll stay where it is. But we have to keep our eye on the ball of security. And as soon as we find a technology that we could deploy that will allow folks to keep their shoes on, we will be certainly discussing with the committee the opportunity we might use to buy that for all passengers.
As you know, the committee in the 08 bill did address the issue of double identification. There may be other aspects that we'll want to work on in the near term, but for now, I think we'll leave it at that, and I'll turn to Mr. Rogers for any questions he has on this concluding round.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me get back to air cargo screening, and the question is directed to anyone who would like to respond. About 23 billion pounds of cargo is shipped annually in the U.S., and about a quarter of that is shipped via passenger aircraft. That's an astounding amount of poundage, and I suspect a big chunk of the revenue of an airline. What percent of your revenues do you think come from your cargo on passenger planes?
I don't have that statistic with me, but I can certainly furnish it to you.
Well, give me a guess.
I would imagine it's probably about 30%.
Yeah. So this is a very important piece of
Yes, it is.
of whether or not you can operate.
Yes.
The 9/11 Act mandates that we screen 100% of air cargo carried on passenger aircraft by August 2010. I oppose that because it was impractical and we just couldn't get there at that time, but I found myself in the minority and it passed. And it's the law now. And then we've been told, Mr. Secretary, that development of full screening technologies to meet that directive may be 5 to 7 years away from now. Is that correct?
Could be if it's done at the airport for the large size pallets.
I'm sorry?
For the large size pallets, the technology does not exist today, and it could well take 5 to 7 years for that to be deployed
In order for you to say you're screening 100%.
at the airport, which is why our solution is to not do it at the airport, because the technology does exist for that.
So you're relying upon the certified shipper program.
Yes, sir.
And you're saying that the certified shipper program meets the requirement of 100% screening, or meets the, it can be called screening.
It will meet the requirements of the law, and that's what we're developing now, is exactly what the requirements are to meet the law.
Well, that's open for debate, whether or not the certified shipper program can be called, as the law calls for, screening of cargo for passenger aircraft. I want to believe that, and I'd like to believe that what you're saying is correct. I'm not sure it is. If you can give us chapter and verse of whether or not certified shipper program satisfies the requirement of the law we passed, requiring 100% screening of cargo on passenger aircraft, then I'll feel better. But I remain unconvinced at this point, and I'm not looking for it today. If you have some time one of these days, perhaps you could get us something on that. Certified shipper program, though, depends on so many intangibles out there, going all the way back to the manufacturing of the product and the integrity of the protection of that product all the way through its many hands into the belly of the craft. It's a lot like when I used to be a prosecutor. You had to establish the chain of evidence, having everyone who touched it along the way come and testify. I had it from January 1 to January 5th, and it was in my hands all the time, and it was never touched by anyone else. That type of a process, and I don't know whether a certified shipper meets those requirements even yet or not, or whether or not certified shipper program satisfies the law requiring 100% screening. What do you think?
The proof of the pudding is when we produce the standards that dictate exactly this is how we do it with what technology, and we haven't provided that data for you, so you don't have the basis to judge. But that is, the burden is on us to demonstrate, and I said we would do it this spring, that would say here are the technologies that could do it. Now, just some attributes of the industry that I think that make it easier to do is that 66% of all that tonnage you're talking about is concentrated in 18 airports, and that drives the size down. And then the other piece of it is that by having certified places to do the screening, it changes from 10,000 known shippers that we have to have our inspectors go to, where we'll have 400 inspectors, and they'll be able to concentrate on far fewer locations to do the inspections. And we also have 170 canine teams for air cargo. So we have quite a few resources lined up to do it. And the model, the air cargo model, is very concentrated. We today, at all of the small airports today, run 100% of the air cargo through exactly the same technology as we do for checked bags. So we have a head start, probably more so than most people think. But the whole ballgame is going to come down to exactly what those standards are of what is the approved technology that can constitute screening under the 9/11 Act.
Now, are you anticipating the airlines would pay the equivalent of a passenger fee for this service?
No. What we're anticipating, the airlines will certainly be a participant as they are today in the screening, but we do not think it's the right answer to have them bear the entire burden for a variety of reasons, including the operational ones of it wouldn't work piling everything up at the airport. And I think the other point on my understanding of the air cargo industry is that it is a significant part of the profitability picture for airlines, and therefore is very important network-wide to have a profitable airline system, and that a vibrant air cargo industry plays into that.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, it's self-evident that they must have this, but the government is going to a huge expense to ensure the safety of that cargo that is passive and is the reason for the airline's way to make profit. Should they not bear some more of the expense of what we're going
I think the supply chain should, in fact, bear, it should be shared among the airlines and the other participants in the supply chain. And at the end of the day, it's the person who makes the product who's going to pay the bill, in that if it's a computer manufacturer, they're going to pay what it costs to get their computer to their customer. And if they will have the incentive to therefore set up screening at the manufacturing location, and then it is far easier at that point to secure the chain of custody, as you described, than perhaps hitting it at other points in the supply chain. So we think the market incentives will drive some of the manufacturers to do it at the point of manufacture. The large freight consolidators, I expect, will have a significant portion of this, and we are expecting them to participate in the cost of this ongoing, that would not be subsidized entirely by the government.
Where are you today on the certified shipper program?
We have 3 efforts underway. San Francisco, we've been in San Francisco for about a month, and in Philadelphia and Chicago, I think we started this week. So we'll be adding additional pilots, I believe 6 more in March, and then further as we go.
And when do you anticipate putting out certified shipper standards?
This spring.
And will there be a notice of rulemaking with opportunity to comment and so on?
We're working through those, what the legal vehicle is to get that done. What our hope is that we'll get the standards out, and then we will get some participants to step up and accept those and implement them right away. But certainly it will follow up with a requirement of some sort.
Well, we'll be watching that with interest as we go along here. You say spring, meaning what?
By June 20th.
June 20.
Yes, sir.
All right. Let me set my clock.
It's the longest day of the year.
Lastly, Mr. Chairman, let me quickly ask about, get back to the airport employee screening pilot. Where do we have a pilot or pilots going on now on security of airport employees?
We have announced that we'll be doing 7 pilots. They will begin, again, so we don't have the exact date, but our expectation is that they are 90-day pilots that will be concluded by, I would say, the fall, such that we would have results to be able to report to Congress in this calendar year. And we're going to do 3 of the pilots will be full employee screening, physical screening of employees coming to work. 4 will be of alternative methods of providing security, and then we'll have a third party evaluate the results and then report to Congress.
Well, according to a 2007 report, nearly 700,000 airport employees across the country, including cleaners, maintenance workers, catering and ramp workers, and others, hold what's called Secure Identification Display Area Badges, SIDA, which allow them access in the proximity of passenger aircraft on the ground. Often, and I'm sure perhaps all the time, these are the lowest paid workers at the airport. They are not routinely screened, unlike the flight crews that have to pass through regular security screening. It just seems to me that despite the efforts of the airports, and we praise them for that, that it's still not up to where we'd like to see it. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I believe more can be done, which is why we have our program that we've put up. Our folks and then the Congress and this committee has supported dedicating up to, I think it's 1,200 employees full-time in fiscal year '08 and an addition, and 1,600 total in '09. And that is to get at it regardless of what the pilots show, that we'll be able to, that we're already doing that today.
So at the pilots, at least at 3 airports, you're going to have 100% employee screening.
Correct.
And the other 4 will be random screening?
Yes, random, neighborhood watch, things like
And
that.
then 3 of the 7 will include vehicular screening.
I believe they all will involve vehicular screening. One, the 3 would be at 100%. The others would be something else.
What kind of screening will that entail?
It would, there would be a couple of options. One would be the visual inspection. Another one would be canines, and we have portable explosive detectors that could be used in those as well.
You're talking about the vehicular.
Yes, sir.
And what about the employee?
Well, you could use the same technology on the passenger, but you'd add a handheld magnetometer.
Yeah. So we'll get the report when?
By the end of the calendar year, 2008.
Yeah. Well, in closing, let me congratulate you, Mr. Hawley, for a terrific job. It's a tough job you have, one of the toughest in the government, I think. And you've brought an expertise to that job that you have that was right for the job. We appreciate your service and dedication to the country.
Thank you.
And the same to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank
Mr. Rogers.
Thank you. Ms. Lowy, I know, needs to leave, so I want to give her a chance to...
She wanted to
Yeah,
respond.
I'm sorry. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to mention the 2 questions you had related to air cargo and the Certified Shipper Program and employee access screening. GAO has ongoing work looking at both of those areas, and we're going to be reporting out later this year, and we'd be happy to come and talk to you about our results and brief you on those.
We'd love to hear it.
Good, thank you. Ms. Lowy.
I want to first thank the chairman for holding this hearing and apologize, but as we all know, there are probably a dozen appropriations hearings going on. Otherwise, I would have loved to be here. And I would like to follow up for a moment with Mr. Rogers' compliments, because Assistant Secretary Hawley is really a pleasure to work with, and your answers are always direct. You don't talk around the issue, and although we may have some slight disagreements, it is not without a great deal of respect that I ask you all these questions, so I thank you very much. I want to follow up on Mr. Rogers' line of questioning for a moment, because Ms. Sterling and Mr. Bennett, both of you say in your testimony categorically that 100% screening of airport employees is not reasonable. Yet we know it works at some of the busiest airports in the world, Heathrow, Charles de Gaulle. Piloting these measures, as I've been advocating, and this committee recently required, can only provide us with more knowledge of our aviation security measures. Frankly, I find it hard to believe, and when I read your statements, I find it hard that you said it's not reasonable, because it's never been tried on a wide-scale level in the United States, and at the airports that perform some level of employee screening, Miami and Orlando, it appears effective. If it isn't, I'd love to hear about it. There are other problems with Miami. I was there not too long ago and waited about an hour and a half on a line, but that's another story. It had nothing to do with the workers. So Secretary Hawley, while we may disagree on the merits of 100% employee screening, I'm very pleased that TSA has moved quickly to comply with the intent of Congress, and I really do look forward to the results of these pilot programs. And by the way, I would just say, after I ask another question, Ms. Sterling and Mr. Bennett, if you want to backtrack on that comment in your report and not say it's not reasonable, you certainly would have an opportunity to respond. I am puzzled as why you, Secretary Hawley, and some of the witnesses who are here today have expressed reluctance to implement the 100% screening pilot program in the past. I'd be very interested to know how many airports have expressed an interest in participating in the pilot program.
We had the 7 that we have are volunteers. I have to say they were motivated, I think, perhaps thinking that there would be federal funds to cover the costs of the pilots, which there are. They will have some expense of their own.
Any way you can motivate them is just fine, right?
Well, we need to get the data, and I think to your point, and I appreciate your kind words, and I think we do in fact disagree on this topic, but I think this.
You're coming along, though.
on the pilots, I think it will go a long way to giving us data on which we can say here's what we found out, and we'll certainly go where the data takes us.
Now, Ms. Sterling, your testimony advocates for a more tamper-proof ID badge at our airports, but still doesn't seem to get to the fundamental issue of protecting aircraft from employees who wish to cause destruction. So under the proposal you mentioned, what assurances are there that an employee properly vetted and badged isn't carrying a gun or IED into the secure or sterile area?
I think my focus of my testimony was more on the badging process. And in my testimony, I stated that the current piecemeal approach to security badge that exists because airports wants to retain control over their existing local system is simply not acceptable. And what I mean by that, if you can imagine where you have crew members traveling the United States, they require access to the secure side. And having to have 15 or 20 different ID badges to be able to do that would be quite cumbersome for them to do so. So what we are advocating is that there be a system approach to ID badging and credentialing, which we believe makes a lot of sense. In no time in my testimony would I ever take away from added security measures that we have in place today, that TSA has in place today, by randomly checking people who are on the AOA. And I support that, and we agree with that 100%.
But where we disagree is you're talking about random checking, and they don't randomly check members of Congress. It's 100%, so we just think it should be 100%. But I gather we disagree on that one. Secretary Hawley, in light of the various criminal incidents involving airport and airline workers last year, the Comair incident in Orlando, the Russell DeFreitas arrest connected to JFK, the SIDA badge bust at O'Hare, is TSA taking any additional steps to better account for personnel within secure and sterile areas and limit workers to only the areas of an airport they are permitted to be in?
Yes, in addition to what we call ADASP, which is the random unpredictable screening that we do every day at every airport and now have dedicated 1,200 folks to do, we have put additional work with our colleagues at ICE in establishing the reliability of the underlying documents, establishing the identity of the person who then goes over to the airport badging office. So in other words, Peggy Sterling's been talking about the badging process. That is a critical part. There's an additional critical part prior to that, which is to establish the validity of the person. Let's say they come to a cleaning company and applying to the cleaning company and say who they are. We need to check that those are the correct documents and that those are valid. So we have done over the last several months three times, in fact, a surge on SIDA badge, whether people are displaying them properly. We followed it up with 10 airports where we've gone in and gone back to the cleaning company level, and we have found some areas that need to be improved, and that's something that we're working with not only the airports we're on the same side with airports, which is they want to know too that they're the right people, but how do we ensure that we have the correct chain of custody, as Mr. Rogers was saying, of the individual's validity from the point of application to the company all the way through to the SIDA badge.
Thank you very much, and I know my time is up. I thank the chairman, and I'll submit the rest of the questions for the record.
Thank you. Before turning to Mr. Farr, I do want to briefly turn to Mr. Bennett and see if he'd like to, since your testimony's been referenced several times, see if you want to briefly elaborate.
I would enjoy elaborating. Thank you for the opportunity. What the airport community proposes in lieu of 100% screening, we feel, is actually more effective and improves the security environment more than 100% screening of employees. 100% screening of airport employees does little towards understanding whether any of those individuals has an intent to do harm to the aviation system. And the program that we have proposed of more robust background investigations, the randomness of the program that is in place today of screening individuals, putting the biometric identification mediums on those individuals, and limiting the number of those individuals that have that unrestricted access to certain areas of the airport. We believe that a combination of those measures is actually more effective than 100% screening, because we need to remember that airports are very complex environments. And even though you may be screening 100% of those employees before they go to their workstation, as a routine of their daily job, they are working with equipment and tools and chemicals and devices that are just as destructive as any gun or bomb may be. And screening those employees as they go to work does not keep them from having access to that equipment as part of their daily job. And our proposal is we are trying to establish whether any of those employees would have the intent to do harm with those devices.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you for pursuing that question, and I thank you for your thoughtful response, although I respectfully disagree, respecting your experience in this area, because not everybody who may do harm has the intent to do harm or the background which reflects any indication that they could do harm. And it seems to me that we should keep our minds open. And I look forward to the pilot program, because we've seen these incidents in Orlando and elsewhere where there were those who did harm or could have done harm when they may not have had a biography, a resume that reflected the fact that they may do harm. So thank you very much.
Thank you. The discussion will continue. Mr. Farr, close us out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on that concept, I'm in the IED area in Iraq, I know, in Afghanistan, we've spent billions of dollars trying to detect these things, and now we're spending some good money on trying to do the psychology of why do people want to do this in the first place, go to the individual intent. I think that's smart intelligence, and I know we have to do that. And what, Mr. Hawley, I want to ask you about is I know TSA has major challenges in building the intelligence capabilities that are necessary for our transportation system. And I know that those challenges are strengthening your own in-house capabilities, personnel, with analytic expertise, but it's also the ability to coordinate the data systems that are collected by all these government agencies and allow you to have those data systems interoperable. So I wondered, what programs do you have underway to help build your intelligence analysts and also to make the information system interoperable? And in your opinion, what is the most important TSA intelligence areas that the next administration needs to focus on, and where are we going?
I think those are really critical questions, because the way to stop attacks is to get them before they're launched. And the Department of Homeland Security has a Chief Intelligence Officer, Charlie Allen, who at the department level has created a university, if you will, for taking new people into the intelligence business and training them up as analysts, and then having them be provided to the DHS entities. And I think that is an excellent long-term program and will have long-term benefits. We have the benefit of a very professional intelligence staff at TSA. Mr. Allen helped us recruit those individuals, and we are daily participants with the counterterrorism community that is called together by the National Counterterrorism Center, NCTC, every day. has a briefing, an interactive briefing. I personally participate every day, including today, and that is, I think, the best way for us to keep both the intelligence that's going on and the tactical response and understand what the FBI is doing, what TSA is doing, other DHS components. We do that on a daily basis. I think that is the best thing. On the interoperability of systems, the Terrorist Screening Center holds the watch list, and that's, I think, the most important part of the information interoperability, of getting those watch lists right, both in terms of the right people and the protection of that data, so that we're not inconveniencing individuals who are not meant to be on those watch lists. And I think so that is a focus of ours with the Terrorist Screening Center, and we are very close with them in terms of going through every individual file to make sure that there's not a mistake and that the most information we have on that individual is there and accurate, so it sorts away from people who should not be involved. The longer-term issue is cyber, and I think it was very instructive. Secretary Chertoff, in the end of 2007, looking ahead to 2008, listed it as one of his top 4 worries. I think as we go as a country, that is going to be a very central issue. Information protection and integrity is going to be a national priority. I think it'll be right at the top going forward. And I would add, you mentioned earlier the Naval Postgraduate School, and they have a center of excellence in this area, and we have participated with them, and they are, in fact, now talking to the department about using the resources that they have and the learning that they have developed in this to quickly make that available to the DHS effort.
Thank you. I also had a question that this committee appropriated $40 million to expand the model ports of entry program to the top 20 international inbound airports. And I wondered whether you could access some of that funding to improve the TSA screening process in those designated model ports of entry.
I don't know the answer to that, but we will. I will follow up to make sure that we're engaged with the model ports of entry, and whether or not we have access to the dollars associated there, we will participate and be a good partner with that.
The one thing that I ran against, Nita just talked about, Ms. Lowy, about Miami Airport. When I recently went through there, Dade County, which owns the airport, has employed 12 professional greeters because that airport has so many VIPs, from diplomats, members of parliaments, and so on, from around the world coming through there as a port of entry. And I know they work closely with TSA, but it really does expedite. And one of the things we've heard on our side from visitors from other countries, our colleagues who are in the Duma in Russia was the one that really, he came and he said he'd been here 12 times. This was in this building, and he indicated he's never coming back because of the way he was treated at his port of entry. That wasn't Miami, but I mean, we've never put into the values this whole situation of what about those local assets, local ability to have people employed at the ground level to sort of do that kind of stuff. It's a value to that airport, but other airports of entry don't have those kinds of offices. And I don't know what I'm saying other than, the local government seems to be able to do in some cases, put on that extra value that other airports perhaps ought to be doing. The last question, if I can get into it, is the USA Today reported yesterday on the findings of the 6-month investigation into the effectiveness of TSA's security procedures. They reported that the hype and the hassles are not balanced by effective procedures at TSA. The report's findings, along with continued flight delays, of outdated traffic control systems, of record levels of lost passenger luggage, have made us all keenly aware that domestic air travel system is getting worse, not better. And I wondered if you'd agree that TSA should participate in a comprehensive plan to tackle this problem, along with relevant public and private sector stakeholders, such as at the table. I mean, it's more than none of these problems is all within one jurisdiction. And it's sort of this question of interoperability that seems to be the appropriate word these days, of getting everybody, regardless of how they get there, to the table to work on making these systems work systematically rather than, and I was just shocked to hear that you got to have all these different IDs depending on the airport you're in. It just doesn't make sense. So are you all working towards that?
Certainly, at DHS, we are very definitely. I mentioned at the very beginning when I said we're doing our Viper programs, we do those in conjunction with CBP and ICE. When we talk about the credentialing, those we also do with CBP and ICE in terms of assuring the accuracy. And I think your point about the system nature of it, having all parties working together, is exactly right on. And it is something that we all, it's a shared responsibility, and the degree to which we work well together, it does better. So I am not familiar with the report you cite, but the issues are familiar. And I know at DHS, a large part of what Paul Schneider, who's our acting deputy secretary, does, and yesterday as an example, we meet every week as component heads with the deputy secretary to go over operational integration opportunities. So it is something that has the personal attention of every component head at DHS.
Do you think we can ever get to the point where we eliminate the lines, that we don't have to have the individual screening because we will have all of this, the process in place so that you don't have to open every bag and take off your shoes? You mentioned that in your testimony, and I wondered if we could get, how long it would take us to get there.
Yes, and I think it's a future administrator who will get to tell you how to do it. So.
But it is doable.
Sure, conceptually. I don't have the equipment, and I'm not sure it exists on Earth quite yet. But, millimeter wave has a way of, you can put them in sensors that will be more standoff, and I think when they're accurate as a standoff, then you can have more of a walk-through type screening process and a more distributed identity verification. It clearly is possible. It just hasn't been put together, either the technology or operationally. So, but it's absolutely possible.
With that, we'll bring the hearing to a close. I want to thank all of you for being here, for your patience with our delay, and with the unique information each of you brought to the table. We are very grateful, and we'll be in touch as we put our bill together. Thank you.